I was standing near Gate 14 at San Diego International Airport, my coat folded neatly over one arm, my carry-on at my feet, and a carefully wrapped box pressed against my chest like it might slip away if I loosened my grip. Inside that box was a lace veil. It had belonged to my mother once. She wore it in 1947 in a small church in Minneapolis back when everything still felt certain and permanent. I wore it again in 1972, standing beside Robert, believing in the same kind of forever. I had brought it with me across the country for my son's wedding. I bought my own ticket, booked my own hotel, packed quietly without asking for anything. I even tucked the veil between soft layers of tissue paper, thinking perhaps foolishly that his bride might want something meaningful, something that had survived time, something that still held. People moved around me in steady currents. Rolling suitcases, boarding calls, a child laughing somewhere behind me as his mother tried to catch up. Life was happening in every direction, fast and ordinary. Then my phone buzzed. I glanced down expecting a message about the rehearsal dinner, or maybe a quick "Where are you?" from Daniel. Instead, I saw 5 words. Actually, it's just her family. I stared at the screen for a second longer than I needed to, as if more text might appear underneath. An explanation, a correction, a follow-up message that would turn this into something less final. Nothing came. A couple walked past me, the woman glancing briefly at my face before looking away. A man nearby adjusted his bag and cleared his throat, the sound oddly loud in the space between everything that had just changed. I read the message again. Actually, it's just her family. A woman passing by slowed just slightly, her eyes flicking toward my phone, before she looked away again as if she had seen something she wasn't meant to. Overhead, a boarding announcement cut through the space, calm and practiced calling passengers to a gate that wasn't mine. I didn't move. My fingers tightened around the box, the edge pressing into my palm, grounding me in a way nothing else could. People kept walking, bags rolling, conversations continuing. And somehow everything around me stayed exactly the same, while something in my life had just quietly ended. No apology, no call, no hesitation in the wording, just a quiet removal delivered in the middle of an airport like it was a change of plans. He knew I was coming. He knew I had already landed. And he waited until I was standing there holding a veil meant for his wedding to tell me I no longer had a place in it. My fingers tightened slightly around the box, the edges pressing into my palm. I became aware of my own breathing, slow and deliberate, as if I needed to keep everything steady from the inside out. I didn't cry. I didn't call him. I didn't type a reply. The boarding announcements continued overhead, voices calm and practiced guiding strangers to places they were still welcome. I stood there a moment longer, then turned and walked toward the exit. The taxi ride to the hotel was quiet. The driver, Luis, according to the small badge clipped to his dashboard, tried once to make conversation, asking if I was visiting for business or vacation. I told him family, and that seemed to be enough. He nodded, turned up the radio just slightly, and let the rest of the ride pass in silence. San Diego moved by outside the window in soft afternoon light. Palm trees, clean streets, people walking in pairs alone together. A city that had no idea I had just been erased from something that once felt like the center of my life. At the Best Western Plus Bayside Inn, the lobby smelled faintly of citrus and polished wood. A young man behind the desk, Jason, greeted me with a practiced smile. Checking in, yes, I said, setting my bag down beside me. Name Eleanor Brooks. He typed, quickly, glanced at the screen, then back at me. You're here for 3 nights? I hesitated just for a second. Then I nodded. That's right. He handed me a key card, explained breakfast hours, pointed out the elevators. It was all very normal, comfortingly normal. I thanked him and made my way upstairs. The room was quiet. 2 beds, neutral-colored walls, a window overlooking a slice of the harbor in the distance. It could have been any hotel room in any city. I set the box with the veil carefully on the dresser, smoothing the wrapping paper as if it still mattered how it looked. Then I sat on the edge of the bed. For a few minutes I didn't move. I just listened to the faint hum of the air conditioner, the distant sound of traffic, the quiet weight of a message that had said everything it needed to say in 5 words. Actually, it's just her family. I let the sentence settle fully this time, without searching for a softer interpretation. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't timing. It was a decision. And suddenly, a pattern I hadn't wanted to see began to take shape in my mind, not from this moment alone, but from years of smaller ones I had quietly explained away. I reached into my purse and took out my phone again. The message was still there, unchanged. I didn't open it this time. Instead, I opened the Notes app. If I stayed in this room without doing something, I knew I would start to unravel in ways I wouldn't be able to control. So I did the only thing that had ever steadied me in difficult moments. I made a list. 2 things. I stared at the blank screen for a second, then typed the first line slowly, carefully. Call a lawyer. My thumb hovered before I added the second. Stop all financial support. I read the list twice. It looked simple. Almost too simple for something that felt this large. For 20 years, I had been the one who filled the gaps. Quietly. Consistently. Without asking for anything in return, except perhaps the unspoken assumption that I still belonged. Now, for the first time, I was writing down what it might look like to step out of that role. I placed the phone beside me on the bed and exhaled slowly. There would be details to figure out, conversations to have, decisions that wouldn't feel easy, but the direction was clear. I was not going to fund a life that no longer had room for me. I stood up, walked over to the dresser, and rested my hand lightly on the box containing the veil. For a moment, I considered opening it. Then I decided not to. Some things didn't need to be unfolded right away. I turned off the lamp, letting the room settle into a softer light, and looked once more at the list on my phone. 2 steps. That was enough for now. It was the first time I understood that losing a place in someone's life didn't mean I had to keep paying to stay in it. I didn't sleep much that first night. The room was quiet, but my thoughts weren't. They kept circling back not just to the message at the airport, but to smaller moments I had dismissed over the years. Things that hadn't made sense at the time, but now seemed to line up too easily. Every so often I glanced at my phone on the nightstand. The screen stayed dark. No second message, no call, no explanation. By midnight, I stopped expecting one. Sometime after 2, I got up and walked to the dresser. My hand rested lightly on the box holding the veil. The paper was still smooth, untouched. I left it that way. Some things didn't need to be opened yet. Morning came quietly. A thin line of light slipped through the curtains, and for a few seconds I forgot where I was. Then everything settled back into place. The airport. The message. The list. I reached for my phone and opened my notes. Call a lawyer. Stop all financial support. I read the words again, waiting for doubt. It didn't come. Downstairs, I sat by the window with a cup of coffee that had already gone lukewarm. People moved past outside with the kind of certainty that comes from knowing where you belong. I watched them for a while, then opened my contacts. Susan Keller. I pressed call. She answered after a few rings. Eleanor. It's been a while. It has, I said. Are you available this morning? I can make time. What's going on? I need to make changes, I said, to my will and my trust. There was a brief pause. Not hesitation, just attention. All right. Do you want to come in, or should we do this remotely? I'm in San Diego, I said, so remote would be better. That's fine. Give me 30 minutes. I'll send you a secure link. I'll be ready. Back in my room, I set up my laptop and waited. When the email came through, I clicked the link without thinking twice. Susan appeared on the screen exactly as I remembered, calm, focused, precise. Good morning, Eleanor. Good morning. She didn't ask for a full explanation. She didn't need one. Tell me what you'd like to change, she said. I want to remove my son as the primary beneficiary, I said. She held my gaze for a moment, then nodded. And who would you like to designate instead? My granddaughter. Lily, she made a note. We can move your assets into a revocable living trust with Lily as the primary beneficiary. We'll set distribution terms, education, health, and then full access later. Do you have an age in mind? 25, I said. That's reasonable. She wrote it down. And your son, I want it clearly stated that he is intentionally excluded. She didn't react, just continued writing. We'll include a no contest clause. It won't stop a challenge entirely, but it discourages one. Good. She walked me through the rest documents timelines, what could be done now and what would need final signatures later. It was all structured practical. No emotion, just process. That made it easier. We'll prepare everything quickly, she said. I'll send drafts for your review within a day. Thank you. When the call ended, I closed the laptop and sat there for a moment. Nothing about the room had changed, but something inside it had. The decision wasn't abstract anymore. It had direction. I reached for my phone again. There was one more thing I needed to do. I opened my messages and for a moment paused over Daniel's name. Then I scrolled past it. Lily. Her name felt different, untouched by everything else. I opened the conversation. Hey, sweetheart, I'm in San Diego. I'd love to see you while I'm here. Do you have time to meet? I read it once, then sent it. The message felt small, but it wasn't. It was the first thing I had done that wasn't a reaction to what had happened. I set my phone down and waited. 5 minutes passed, then 10. I told myself she might be in class or busy or simply living a life that didn't revolve around me. My phone buzzed. I looked down. Hey, Grandma. Yes, of course, I'd love to see you. When are you free? I let out a slow breath. For the first time since I landed, something inside me shifted in a different direction. Not away, but back towards something that still existed. I typed back, suggesting a time and a place near Gaslamp. Her reply came almost immediately. Tomorrow works perfectly. I can meet you there. I read the message again just to be sure. I wasn't part of the wedding, but I wasn't invisible. Not entirely. And for now, that was enough. That was enough to keep moving. The next day felt steadier. Not easier, but steadier. I took my time getting ready that morning, choosing a simple blouse and a light cardigan. Something comfortable, something that didn't ask for attention. I left the veil where it was still wrapped, still waiting on the dresser. I wasn't ready to decide what it meant yet. Gaslamp Quarter was already busy by the time I arrived. The sidewalks were lined with small cafes and restaurants, people talking over late breakfasts and early lunches, the kind of place where conversations overlapped and no one paid much attention to anyone else. I chose a table near the window at Café 21 and ordered iced tea. My hands rested loosely on the table as I waited, watching the door more often than I meant to. When Lily walked in, I recognized her immediately. She looked older than the last time I had seen her, taller, more certain in the way she moved, but there was something in her expression that hadn't changed, something open, uncomplicated. Grandma. Her voice carried just enough hesitation to make sure. I stood up. Lily. She crossed the space between us quickly and wrapped her arms around me without asking first. I held her back, feeling the warmth of her, the reality of her, in a way that steadied something inside me. I'm so glad you're here, she said as she pulled back, smiling. So am I. We sat down and for a few moments everything felt almost normal. She told me about her classes, her roommates, a professor she liked. Small things, ordinary things offered without weight. I listened, asking questions where I could, letting her fill the space. After we ordered, there was a pause. Not uncomfortable, but noticeable. She looked at me, her expression shifting slightly. Dad said you couldn't make it. The words were simple, casual even, but they landed differently. I see, I said. He said you had something come up back home, she continued. I thought it was strange, but I didn't want to question it. I nodded slowly, giving myself a moment before answering. I was at the airport yesterday, I said. I had already landed. Her eyes changed, not dramatically, but enough. What do you mean? I said gently. I was told not to come after I arrived. She stared at me for a second as if trying to place the sentence somewhere that made sense. He didn't tell me that, she said quietly. I didn't think he did. Her gaze dropped to the table, her fingers tracing the edge of her glass. He said it was just a small ceremony, that maybe it would be easier this way. For whom I asked, not sharply, just clearly. She didn't answer right away. I don't know, she said finally. The food arrived then, giving us both a brief interruption. Plates were set down, glasses adjusted, a polite smile from the server before she moved on. Lily picked up her fork, then set it down again. That doesn't make sense, she said almost to herself. Why wouldn't he just tell me the truth? I watched her for a moment before speaking. Sometimes I said people choose the version of a story that's easier to live with. She looked up at me. That's not fair to you. No, I said. It isn't. There was no anger in my voice, just acknowledgement. She leaned back slightly, shaking her head. I can't believe he did that. You flew all the way here. I did. And he just... She stopped searching for the right word. Uninvited you. I gave a small nod. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The noise of the cafe filled the space around us, a reminder that the world continued even when something personal shifted beneath it. I'm sorry, she said finally. Thank you, I replied. It mattered more than I expected. We ate a little after that, the conversation moving in quieter directions, not avoiding what had been said, but not pressing it further either. There are truths that settle better when you don't force them all at once. After a while, I reached into my bag. There's something I brought, I said. I placed the box gently on the table between us. Lily looked at it, then back at me. What is it? It was meant for the wedding, I said, but I think it still belongs somewhere. She opened it carefully, folding back the paper until the lace was visible. Her expression softened immediately. It's beautiful, she said. It belonged to my mother, I told her. And then, to me. She ran her fingers lightly over the edge as if she understood that it wasn't just fabric. I paused, choosing the words carefully. I thought I would offer it to Daniel's bride. But that doesn't seem right anymore. Lily looked up at me. You want me to have it? I want you to keep it safe, I said, until it means something to you. Her eyes filled slightly, though she didn't let the tears fall. I don't know what to say, she whispered. You don't have to say anything. She closed the box gently, holding it a little closer to herself. I'll take care of it, she said. I know you will. We sat there for a moment longer, the weight of the exchange settling into something quieter, something steadier than what had come before. In that moment, it became clear to me that something had shifted. Not everything, but something important. I might have lost my place in my son's life, but I hadn't lost my place entirely, and that realization, small as it was, felt like something I could stand on. After lunch with Lily, I walked back toward the hotel more slowly than I had the day before. The city looked the same light, the same movement, the same distant sound of traffic and voices blending into one steady rhythm, but something inside me had shifted just enough that I wasn't moving through it the same way. I wasn't rushing anymore. I wasn't waiting for a message that wasn't coming. I was thinking. Not just about what had happened at the airport or what Lily had told me, but about everything that had led to it. The kind of thinking that doesn't stay in the present, no matter how much you try to keep it there. By the time I reached my room, I knew I wasn't going to distract myself from it. Some things needed to be looked at directly. I sat on the edge of the bed, the same place I had sat the day before, and let my mind move backward without stopping it this time. It didn't go to Daniel first. It went to Robert. There are memories that don't fade no matter how many years pass. They don't stay sharp in every detail, but the feeling of them remains intact and unchanged. Robert had been steady in a way that's hard to explain unless you've lived with it. Not loud, not dramatic, just present. The kind of person who filled a room without needing attention. When he died, it wasn't sudden, but it still felt like something had been taken without permission. The house in Minneapolis had felt different afterward, quieter in a way that wasn't peaceful. The routines we had built together, morning coffee, small conversations, the sound of the television in the evening, had all dissolved into something that didn't quite hold its shape. Daniel had been there at the beginning. He came home more often in those first few months. He called to check on me, asked if I was eating, if I needed anything. There was a kind of closeness that felt at the time like it might grow into something stronger. I remember thinking we would find a new way of being a family. Not the same, but still connected. At first, the calls were regular. Once a week, sometimes more. He would tell me about work, about the people he met, about the city he was building his life in. I listened, asked questions, tried to stay part of something that was already starting to move away from me. Then the calls became less frequent, not all at once, not in a way that was easy to point to, just gradually. The calls slowly became less frequent until they almost disappeared. When I called, he often sounded distracted and promised to call back, but not always. I told myself it was normal. He was busy. He was building a life. That's what children are supposed to do. I didn't want to be the kind of mother who held on too tightly. So I adjusted. I made my days fuller in other ways, volunteering at the school, spending time with neighbors, finding routines that didn't depend on him calling. But even then there were small moments that didn't quite sit right, holidays that felt rushed, visits that were shorter than expected, conversations that stayed on the surface as if anything deeper would take too much time. I noticed them. I just didn't name them. When he met Amanda, things shifted again. He seemed different when he talked about her, more certain, more focused. I was happy for him. I told him that more than once. "She sounds wonderful," I said the first time he described her. "She is," he replied. "Her family's great, too." That part came up often. Her family. At first it didn't mean much to me. Of course she had a family. Of course they were part of his life now. But over time I began to hear the difference in the way he spoke. Plans that included them, trips taken with them, holidays spent with them. When I asked about visiting, the answers were polite but vague. "We'll figure something out. Things are a bit busy right now. Maybe after the holidays." I accepted those answers. I told myself it was just timing. There was one dinner a few years ago that I still remember more clearly than I'd like. I had been invited to meet Amanda's parents. It was at a restaurant not far from where Daniel lived. Something upscale, but not overly formal. I arrived early, as I always did. When they walked in, Daniel greeted me with a quick hug. Amanda smiled, warm but measured. Her parents were polite, welcoming in the way people are when they are used to being in control of the space they occupy. The conversation stayed on safe surface-level topics, but at some point I noticed that I was listening more than speaking. Daniel responded to them quickly, easily. He seemed relaxed in a way I didn't often hear when we spoke alone. When I tried to add something, the conversation would shift again before it had fully settled. Not intentionally, not in a way that could be called rude, just naturally, as if I were slightly out of step with the rhythm of the table. I remember sitting there, smiling, nodding, telling myself it didn't matter. It was just one dinner. People adjust. Families take time. But looking back now, I can see it more clearly. That wasn't the beginning of the distance. It was a moment where the distance became visible. From there, things continued the way they had been. Calls that came and went, visits that felt shorter, conversations that didn't go as deep as they once had, and me on the other side of it choosing again and again not to question it too closely, because questioning it would have meant acknowledging something I wasn't ready to face. I leaned back slightly on the bed, my hands resting loosely in my lap. The room was quiet again, just like the night before, but the silence felt different now. It wasn't empty. It was filled with things I had finally allowed myself to see. And for the first time, I asked myself a question I hadn't wanted to ask before. Not about Daniel. Not about Amanda. About me. How long had I been noticing these things? And choosing not to see them? There are truths that don't arrive all at once. They gather slowly, waiting for the moment you're willing to stop looking away. And sitting there in that quiet room, I realized something that felt both simple and difficult at the same time. Maybe none of this had happened suddenly. Maybe I had just been looking past it for far too long. That afternoon, I didn't leave the room. I sat at the small desk by the window, the same place where I had taken the call with Susan, and opened my banking app for the first time in months with any real intention. It wasn't that I had never looked at it before. I had, but always in passing, checking balances, confirming payments, making sure everything was where it needed to be. This was different. This time I was looking for something, or maybe I already knew what I was going to find. I kept scrolling through the transactions. The pattern didn't appear all at once. It built itself gradually, just like everything else had. The first larger transfer came years ago, $12,000. I remembered that one clearly. Daniel had called late in the evening, his voice tight-controlled in a way that told me he was more worried than he wanted to admit. "It's just temporary," he had said. "I'm short on the down payment for the apartment. I'll pay you back." I didn't hesitate. Of course, I told him. "You don't need to worry about that." At the time, it felt like the natural thing to do, the kind of support a parent gives without keeping score. I moved forward in the records. There was another $7,200 credit card debt. It got a little out of hand, he had said, sounding almost embarrassed. I just need to clear it so I can reset. I told him not to worry about it. You've always been responsible, I said. Sometimes things just pile up. Another transfer, $2,800, a medical expense. It's nothing serious, he assured me. Just something insurance didn't fully cover. I didn't ask for details. I sent the money. Then smaller ones, $1,000 for a car repair, $3,000 for what he described as unexpected expenses, another $8,500. That one stood out. I remembered the call. It had been late, past midnight. I hate to ask, he had said, but the roof needs fixing. It can't wait. I sat at my kitchen table in Minneapolis, the house quiet around me, and listened to the urgency in his voice. It's just until I get things sorted, he added. It's fine, I said. Take care of it. At the time, I had felt needed, not used. Needed. That difference mattered to me then. I kept scrolling. There were more, not always large. Sometimes just a few $100s. Individually, none of them felt like a burden. Together, they told a different story. I paused and leaned back slightly in the chair, letting the numbers settle in my mind. Then I did something I hadn't done before. I added them, not quickly, carefully, making sure I didn't miss anything. The total sat there on the screen, simple and exact, $72,000. I didn't scroll right away. My thumb hovered over the screen as the number sat there still and certain. One line pulled my attention, then another. The roof, the credit card, the late-night call I hadn't questioned. Each one felt small when it happened, reasonable, temporary. But now they stood together, aligned in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. Not separate moments, a pattern. And for the first time I saw it all at once. I stared at it for a long moment. It wasn't the number itself that unsettled me. It was what it represented. Not a single emergency, not one moment of crisis, but a pattern. Years of stepping in, years of filling gaps, years of saying yes without asking what the yes was becoming. I closed my eyes briefly, letting the weight of it register fully. $72,000. I thought about the things I had quietly given up and how often our conversations had ended with him needing something, and how often I had answered the same way. Of course, don't worry about it. I'll take care of it. I opened my eyes and looked back at the screen. The number hadn't changed. It didn't feel exaggerated. It didn't feel unfair. It felt accurate. That was the part that was hardest to ignore. I wasn't angry, not in the way people expect anger to look. There was no sudden rush of heat, no desire to confront, no urge to call and demand an explanation. What I felt instead was something quieter, clearer, a kind of understanding that didn't leave much room for denial. This hadn't been about occasional support. It hadn't been about helping him through a difficult time. It had become something else, something steady, expected, built into the way our relationship functioned. I had told myself for years that this was what love looked like, showing up, giving when it was needed, not keeping track, but sitting there looking at the full picture for the first time, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to see before. Love doesn't ask to be accounted for, but it also doesn't disappear entirely from the exchange. There is still acknowledgement, still presence, still something that moves both ways. I hadn't been asking for much, just a place, a voice, a seat at the table, and somehow, even with everything I had given that hadn't been part of the arrangement, I let out a slow breath and set the phone down on the desk. The room was quiet again, not heavy, not empty, just honest. And in that honesty, the shape of what I had been part of came into focus with a clarity I couldn't ignore anymore. This wasn't just help. It wasn't just generosity. It was something that had been quietly structured over time, without either of us naming it directly. A system, one where I gave and he received, one where the expectation was no longer questioned. I sat there for a long moment, letting that realization settle fully. Because once you see something clearly, you can't go back to not seeing it. And for the first time, I understood what had been happening beneath everything else. This wasn't support. It was a cost. A quiet, ongoing cost I had been paying without noticing the total. A kind of tax, not on my finances, but on something much harder to replace. My place in his life. It took me years to see it, but in the end, it wasn't generosity that defined what I'd been giving. It was a price I kept paying just to feel like I still belonged. That night, I didn't open the banking app again. I didn't need to. The number was already there, settled in a way that didn't require repeating. $72,000. Not shocking anymore, just clear. I turned off the lights and lay down, staring at the ceiling for a while, letting everything I had seen arrange itself into something I could finally understand. For years I had thought of those moments as separate, a call, a need, a solution. Now they sat together, connected in a way I couldn't separate again. And somewhere between those connections, something inside me shifted. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but enough that I knew I wasn't going to go back to the way things had been. Sleep came in fragments, not restless exactly, just shallow. As if my mind was still working quietly beneath the surface, putting things into place. By the time morning arrived, I wasn't exhausted. I was certain. Once you understand something, you don't move the same way anymore. That was the part I couldn't ignore. I got up, moved through the room slowly, and made coffee using the small machine on the counter. The routine felt grounding in a way I hadn't expected. Outside, the city was already moving. Inside, everything felt still. My phone buzzed just as I sat down. "Lily," I answered almost immediately. "Hi, sweetheart." "Hi." She said, her voice softer than it had been the day before. "Are you okay?" The question was simple, but there was something behind it now, not just concern. Awareness. "I am," I said. "How about you?" "I've been thinking about what you told me yesterday." I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. "That makes sense." There was a small pause on the line. "I talked to Dad," she said. I didn't respond right away. And I asked. "He didn't say it the way you did," she said carefully. "He said it was complicated. That Amanda's family wanted something smaller, that it wasn't personal." I let that sit for a second. "Did that feel true to you?" I asked. Another pause. "No," she said. The honesty in her voice was quiet but firm. "He kept saying it wasn't a big deal," she continued. "That you understood. But it didn't sound like something you would just accept like that." I looked down at my hands resting loosely around the coffee cup. "I didn't accept it," I said. "I didn't think so." There was a shift in her tone then, not just confusion anymore, something closer to disappointment. I asked him why he didn't tell me the truth, she said. He said he didn't want to make it worse. Worse for who I asked. "That's what I asked," she replied quietly. I could almost see her standing somewhere on campus trying to make sense of two versions of the same story that didn't quite align. "I'm sorry you were put in that position," I said. "It's not about me," she said quickly. "It's about you." There was a weight in that sentence that hadn't been there before. "It's about both of us," I said gently. She didn't argue with that. We sat in a brief silence, the kind that doesn't feel empty, just full of things that don't need to be rushed. Then she spoke again. "Grandma, what are you going to do?" The question wasn't dramatic. It wasn't demanding. It was real. I took a slow breath before answering. "I've already started making some changes," I said. "What kind of changes?" "I spoke to my lawyer yesterday," I said. "We're updating my will. And my trust." There was a slight intake of breath on the other end of the line. "What do you mean?" I said, keeping my voice steady, "that I'm removing your father as the primary beneficiary." The silence that followed was longer this time. Not shocked, just processing. And then what she asked. "I'm naming you instead," I said. Another pause. "Me, yes. Grandma, She stopped, then tried again. "I don't even know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," I said. "This isn't something I'm doing because of yesterday alone. It's something I should have thought about a long time ago." She was quiet again. "I didn't know things were like that," she said finally. "I didn't either," I replied. "Not completely. That's a big decision. It is. And Dad, does he know? Not yet. There was something in that answer that shifted the conversation again. Not tension exactly, but awareness of what it meant. You're really doing this, she said. Yes. Not as a reaction, not as a punishment, just a decision. I don't think he expects that, she added. No, I said. I don't think he does either. There was another quiet moment, and then she spoke more carefully. He's going to see it differently. I know. He might think you're being unfair. I understand that. But you don't think you are, she said. It wasn't a question. No, I said. I could feel the weight of that settling between us, not as something heavy, but as something solid. For the first time, the story she had been told and the reality she was starting to see weren't lining up anymore. And she knew it. I don't agree with what he did, she said quietly. I know. And I don't think this is about the wedding. It isn't. Another pause. Then more softly, I'm glad you told me. I let out a small breath. So am I. Because in that moment something had shifted again, not in a way that erased what had happened, but in a way that made it clearer. She wasn't standing in the same version of the story anymore, and neither was I. For a long time I had tried to stay inside a narrative that no longer included me. Now for the first time I was stepping outside of it, and I wasn't stepping out alone. That afternoon I didn't leave the room right away. I sat by the window, the phone still in my hand, long after the call with Lily had ended. The conversation replayed itself in small fragments, not because I was unsure of what had been said, but because I was aware of what had shifted. She had heard both versions, and she had chosen to see clearly. That mattered more than anything I could have explained on my own. I set the phone down and looked out at the harbor in the distance. Boats moved slowly across the water, steady and unhurried, as if they weren't carrying anything complicated at all. For a moment I let myself sit in that stillness. Then I reached for my bag. There was one more part of the list I hadn't acted on yet. Stop all financial support. It had been written the day before. Clear, direct. Now it needed to be real. I opened my laptop again and logged into my bank account this time, not to look backward, but to change what came next. There were a few scheduled transfers still in place, small ones recurring in ways I hadn't paid much attention to before, subscriptions, automatic payments, things that had quietly become part of the background. I canceled them one by one, no hesitation, no second guessing. Each confirmation felt less like a loss and more like a correction. Then I checked the account access settings. Daniel still had permission to initiate requests. It was something I had agreed to years ago when it felt easier than explaining things back and forth. At the time it had seemed practical. Now it didn't. I removed his access. The system asked for confirmation. I clicked yes. It took less than a minute, years of habit undone in seconds. I leaned back slightly in the chair, letting the weight of that settle. There was no surge of emotion, no sense of finality crashing in. Just a quiet awareness that something had been put back into its proper place. I wasn't cutting him out of my life. I was stepping out of a role I had been playing for too long. That distinction mattered. I closed the laptop and sat there for a moment, hands resting loosely in my lap. The room felt different again. Not empty, not heavy, just clear. Later, I stepped outside and walked without a destination in mind. The city moved at its usual pace. Nothing around me reflected what had just changed. And yet everything felt slightly different. The world kept moving, even as everything had changed for me. I passed a small bakery on the corner and stopped without thinking. I took a small bite and sat there for a moment, present in a way I hadn't been in a long time. Across the street, a couple stood waiting at a crosswalk. The woman laughed at something the man said, her hand resting lightly on his arm. It was a simple gesture, one I might have missed before. Now I noticed it. Not with longing, not with comparison, just with awareness. My phone buzzed once in my bag. I didn't reach for it immediately. For years that sound had meant something specific, a request, a need, a moment where I was expected to step in. Now it was just a notification. I let it sit. And in that small pause, I realized something that hadn't been obvious before. I didn't have to respond right away. I didn't have to make myself available on demand. I didn't have to prove anything. The thought settled quietly, but it stayed. I finished the last bite of the cinnamon roll and wiped my hands with a napkin, then finally reached for my phone. The message wasn't from Daniel. It was a notification from the bank confirming the changes I had made. Access removed. Transfers canceled. Simple statements. Clear. I looked at the screen for a moment longer than necessary, then locked it and slipped the phone back into my bag. This time I stood up without hesitation, because something had shifted in a way that didn't need to be explained to anyone else. Not yet. And maybe not ever. There are moments when everything becomes unmistakably clear, when the pattern, the choices, the consequences all line up in a way that can't be ignored anymore. What would you have done in that moment? Would you have kept things the way they were hoping they might change on their own, or would you have done what Eleanor did, quietly stepping back even if it meant standing alone? Tell me what you think. I read every comment. And if this moment made you feel something, don't forget to like the video. It really helps the story reach more people who need to hear it. The day of the wedding arrived without announcement. No message, no reminder, no acknowledgement that it was happening at all. And yet I knew. Some things don't need to be said out loud to be present. I got dressed slowly that morning, choosing something simple. A soft blue dress, one I had worn before, but never in a moment like this. There was no reason to dress for the occasion. No one was expecting me. Still, I didn't want to feel out of place in my own skin. I left the veil in the room. That decision came easily. By late morning, I found myself walking toward Balboa Park. I hadn't planned it in detail. I hadn't told myself I would go. But my feet moved in that direction anyway. The park was open and bright, filled with people who had nothing to do with what was happening just a little further inside. Families walking, children running, tourists stopping to take photos in front of buildings they would remember later. Life again continuing without interruption. The Prado stood ahead, its architecture unmistakable. Elegant, carefully maintained, the kind of place that held celebrations meant to be remembered. I slowed as I approached my steps, becoming more deliberate. There were signs of it everywhere. Floral arrangements near the entrance, guests arriving in small groups dressed with intention, soft laughter, the low murmur of conversations, the quiet excitement that surrounds a wedding just before it begins. For a moment I stood across the path, watching. No one looked at me. No one recognized me. I was just another person passing through. And in a way that made it easier. I found a bench a short distance away, angled just enough that I could see the entrance without being part of it. I sat down. From there, everything was visible, but nothing included me. A group of women stepped out of a car, adjusting their dresses, smoothing their hair. Someone checked a phone, then pointed toward the entrance. A man laughed, his hand resting on another guest's shoulder as they walked inside. The doors opened and closed, each time revealing a brief glimpse of something I wasn't meant to see. And yet I stayed. Not out of hope, not out of expectation, just to witness it. Time moved quietly. At some point, music drifted out from inside. Soft at first, then clearer as the doors opened again. A familiar rhythm, the kind that marks the beginning of something ceremonial. I imagined the room without needing to see it. The rows of chairs, the aisle, the moment everyone stands. I imagined Daniel there, standing at the front waiting, composed, certain, surrounded by people who belonged in that space. I didn't try to picture myself there. That version no longer existed. A woman walked past me, pushing a stroller, glancing down at her child with a smile that was effortless, unguarded, the kind of expression that doesn't question where it belongs. I watched her for a moment, then looked back toward the building. There was no sharp pain anymore. No sudden wave of something I couldn't manage, just a quiet awareness of what was happening and where I stood in relation to it. Outside, separate, still here. At one point, the doors opened wider, and I caught a clearer glimpse inside. White flowers, soft lighting, people turning their attention towards something just out of view. It was enough. I didn't need more than that. I sat there a little longer, letting the moment pass fully, without trying to hold on to it or push it away. Then slowly I stood. No one stopped me. No one called my name. No one noticed. And for the first time, that didn't feel like something I needed to resist. I walked away from the bench back toward the path, the sounds of the wedding fading behind me with each step. The park opened up again wide and ordinary, as if nothing significant had just taken place, but something had. Not inside that building, outside of it, within me. I had come here knowing what I would see, knowing what I wouldn't. And I had stayed. I had watched. I had let the moment exist exactly as it was without trying to change it into something else. And now I was leaving, not forced, not pushed out, just choosing to go. As I reached the edge of the park, I paused briefly, not to look back, but to let the feeling settle. It wasn't relief. It wasn't sadness. It was something quieter, something steadier. I had thought for a long time that being excluded from this moment would break something in me, that it would confirm a kind of loss I wouldn't know how to carry. But standing there at the edge of it all, I realized something I hadn't expected. I was still standing, still moving, still whole in a way that didn't depend on being invited inside. I used to think being left out would take something from me, but standing there I realized it hadn't taken who I was, only where I was allowed to stand. I didn't go back to the hotel right away. Instead, I walked until the sounds of the wedding disappeared completely, until the park opened into quieter streets where nothing marked the day as anything more than ordinary. My phone buzzed once as I reached a shaded corner near a row of small shops. "Lily," I answered this time. "Hi, sweetheart." "Hi," she said, her voice softer than usual. "Are you okay?" "I am," I said. And for the first time it wasn't something I had to think about before answering. There was a small pause. "I left early," she said. "Well, I didn't really stay long." I leaned lightly against the wall beside me. "You didn't have to." "I know," she replied, but it didn't feel right being there after everything. I didn't respond immediately. "Where are you?" she asked. "Not far from the park. Can I come meet you?" I hesitated for just a second, not because I didn't want to see her, but because I was aware of what that meant. "Yes," I said. "Of course." We met about 15 minutes later at a small cafe just off the main street. She walked in quickly, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on me. For a moment she didn't say anything. She just came over and hugged me. This time I held her a little longer. "I'm glad you called," I said quietly. "I'm glad you answered." We sat down, and for a few minutes neither of us tried to explain anything. We didn't need to. "How was it?" I asked after a while. She let out a small breath. "Beautiful. Organized. Everyone looked happy." I nodded. "But it didn't feel right," she added. "Not after what I know now." I watched her carefully. "That's something you'll have to decide for yourself over time." She nodded slowly. "I think I already am." There was a quiet certainty in the way she said it. We talked for a while after that, not just about the wedding, but about her classes, her plans, the things she wanted to do next year. The conversation felt different from the day before, less uncertain, more grounded. At some point, she reached into her bag and gently touched the edge of the box I had given her. "I kept it with me today," she said. "I didn't open it again, but I wanted it there." "That makes sense," I said. "It feels important," she added. "It is." She looked at me then more directly than before. "I'm really glad you gave it to me. I'm glad you have it." We stayed until the cafe began to quiet down, the afternoon fading into early evening. When we stood to leave, she hesitated. "Are you going back home tomorrow?" she asked. "Yes." She nodded. "I'll call you. I'd like that." She smiled, then hugged me again before stepping back. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "I know." And for the first time in a long while, I believed that kind of promise. The flight back to Minneapolis was uneventful. No messages came through while I was in the air, no missed calls waiting when I landed. Just silence. But it didn't feel the same as before. It wasn't something being withheld. It was simply space. The house felt exactly as I had left it. The same quiet rooms, the same familiar arrangement of things that had once felt too still after Robert passed. Now it felt different, not empty, just mine. I set my bag down near the door and stood there for a moment, letting the stillness settle around me. Then I moved slowly through the house, turning on lights, opening a window, letting fresh air move through spaces that had been closed for days. In the living room, I paused. The chair where I used to sit in the evenings was still there, unchanged. The small table beside it, the lamp, the stack of books I had been reading before the trip. Everything in its place. I walked over to the desk and opened the drawer where I kept older documents, bank statements, copies of forms, records I had never quite gotten around to organizing. I took out a small stack and fed it into the shredder. The sound was steady, mechanical, final in a way that didn't need to be dramatic. Page after page disappeared into thin strips, not out of anger, not out of resentment, just completion. When I finished, I closed the drawer and stood there for a moment longer before going upstairs. The veil was still in my suitcase. I took it out carefully, the paper still wrapped the way it had been when I left San Diego. For a moment, I held it in my hands, feeling the weight of something that had carried more meaning than I had fully understood at the time. Then I placed it gently in the back of the closet, not hidden, just stored, waiting for a different moment. Back downstairs, I picked up my phone and opened my messages. Daniel's name sat there, unchanged. I didn't open the conversation. I didn't need to. Instead, I pressed and held, then deleted the thread. The screen cleared. No trace of the last message. No need to revisit it. I set the phone down on the table and turned off the light. That night, as I lay in bed, the house quiet around me, there was no replaying of conversations, no going over what I could have said differently. Just a calm I hadn't felt in a long time. Not because everything was resolved, but because something inside me finally was. 3 months later, the garden looked different, not because it had changed all at once, but because I had started paying attention to it again. Early summer had settled into Minneapolis with a quiet kind of certainty. The air was warm but not heavy, the light lingering just a little longer in the evenings. The small patch of soil behind the house, once something Robert had cared for more than I ever did, had begun to take shape again. Tomato plants lined one side, a few herbs near the edge. Nothing elaborate, just enough to feel alive. I stood there one morning with a cup of coffee in my hand, looking at something that hadn't needed me for a long time, and realizing I hadn't needed to avoid it anymore. The house had settled into a new rhythm. Mornings were quieter, but not empty. Afternoons passed without the constant awareness of waiting for something, some call, some message, some reason to shift my attention elsewhere. Evenings especially felt different, not fuller, just mine. Lily called often, not out of obligation, not in the careful way people check in when they think they should, but naturally. Sometimes to ask a question. Sometimes just to tell me something small about her day. A professor she liked, a class she wasn't sure about, a recipe she had tried and nearly ruined. We laughed more than I expected, and when she visited, which she had done twice already, she moved through the house as if she had always belonged there. She brought the box with her the first time. "I wanted to show you," she said, setting it gently on the table. We opened it together. The lace looked the same as it always had, soft, delicate, carrying more history than either of us tried to explain out loud. "I don't know when I'll use it," she said. "You don't have to," I told her. She nodded. "But I will keep it." That was enough. We didn't talk much about Daniel, not because we were avoiding it, but because there wasn't much left to say that would change anything. He hadn't called. There had been one message, brief and careful, sent a few weeks after the wedding. It said he hoped I was well, that things had been complicated, that he would reach out when things settled. I read it once. Then I set it aside. There was no urgency in responding. There was no space left that required me to. Lily had mentioned in passing that things between him and Amanda's family were exactly as they had always been. Close, structured, defined in ways that made sense to them. And in that same quiet conversation, she had said something else. "I don't think I ever really fit into that the way he does," she admitted. "I've always been more separate." It explained more than she realized. Her place had never depended on that version of family, and now neither did mine. One afternoon, as we sat in the garden together, she told me a story about something that had happened at school, her hands moving as she spoke, her voice steady and open. I listened. Not because I needed to fill a silence, but because I wanted to. That difference stayed with me. Later, after she left, I sat alone for a while watching the light fade slowly over the yard. Nothing dramatic had changed. There were no grand resolutions, no final conversations that tied everything neatly together, just distance and clarity, and something quieter growing in the space that had been left behind. I had thought once that losing my place in my son's life would leave something empty that couldn't be filled again, but standing there in that small garden, I understood something different. Not everything that leaves creates a loss. Sometimes it creates room. Sometimes stepping out of a place that no longer holds you is the only way to find one that does. If you were in my place, would you have kept reaching for a relationship that no longer made space for you? Or would you have stepped back and chosen yourself? Tell me what you think in the comments. If this story stayed with you, take a moment to like it. It helps more than you know. And if you think someone else needs to hear this, share it with them. Don't forget to subscribe.